year over Labor Day, as I go on a bike tour from Poland to Marktown and back, and when I get back from the bike ride, there is Paul with his band performing, and so I know I see him once a year. But Paul has been out to our previous WinterFest and spoken twice, two or three times. So we welcome him back. Yes.
Nice to be back.
And Dr. MacClellan, so Toni, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. This is Toni Costonie, and she's written a book on I'll have her talk about that. And were you at last year's WinterFest or 2 years ago?
2 years ago.
Okay. So, and she'll talk about her work, and I'll leave it up to her.
Hi, I'm Toni Costonie. I'm a writer, researcher, historian, and also a museum specialist. This is my book. And what I'm going to do now is kind of a broad. My specialty is Illinois, and I've kind of tried to expand a little bit. I didn't just look at this good. My dog was upset with me this morning. It didn't work. So I was trying to add more in Indiana, but he decided we weren't. Anyway, what I'm going to do is kind of a broad overview of Illinois and Indiana history, or the history of this region, and try to place it in the context of the Underground Railroad. This is important because the history is not the traditional history we've been taught that all the black people were in the South and they wanted to come north, and the North was always fair and good. It's just not a true story. That's mythology. The true story is this region was first settled by the French. They came into North America, as you can see my map here. They came into the St. Lawrence Seaway, and they set up the first colony in North America in about 1534. Believed that French whalers and hunters first came into Canada chasing beaver and whales, and they got into the St. Lawrence Seaway and saw all that was here, and so the king ordered them to start colonies here for the profit of the French crown. So this is their original claim in North America. This was to be New France. All the blue area was supposed to be a giant French holding, of which Illinois and Indiana were part of. Went all the way down to the Gulf Coast. At that point, all the settlements, French settlements, were in the north. So they actually moved from the north, from Canada. Their first colony was in Quebec, where they had slavery. So from the beginning, every place there was a French colony, there was slavery. Slavery was legal. Whether they actually were able to get anybody was another thing. The part of the map, as you can tell, west of the Mississippi River, this is the Mississippi River, which, tried to cut the country kind of in half. This side was all just a dream. They never really were able to get enough people and get past the Indians to get across, to do much across the Mississippi. So most of their development was just limited to Canada and to our region. Oh, there we go. So this is where we live, in the Mississippi River Valley, and this was the main area of concentration of the French, and this became a real battleground. So there was kind of, Illinois and Indiana became at the epicenter of, like I said, an unspoken war between the forces against slavery and the forces for slavery. The Underground Railroad movement is considered the first non-racial or integrated social movement in the United States. So everybody, it was kind of like what we're trying to get to today, a post-racial America.
It's great to meet you. This is great work.
Thank you.
I'm Paul Petraikis, used to be with Chicago Historical Society, and I got about a 6-minute piece here that I wrote this morning. And here we go.
I'll get the light.
Oh, we got light here, right? There we go. I call this the Crossroads to Freedom. We came up with this title when I co-founded Secure, the Chicago Calumet Underground Railroad effort. I always like a good acronym. This is back in 2000. In 1822, at the same time surveyors were drawing the line that separated Illinois from Indiana, right here, Gurdon S. Hubbard was settling into his trading camp along the River. Hubbard was determined to inaugurate the first commercial connection between Chicago and the Ohio River Valley by creating an overland route that soon became known as Hubbard's Strait. Southern Illinois had a significant number of slaves in the 1820s, as much as 5 to 10% of the population of certain counties. Did Hubbard assist in helping slaves travel north to freedom? We may never know, because Hubbard's personal scrapbook, long held in the Library of Chicago Historical Society, went missing sometime in the 60s. Did Hubbard witness the horrors of the slave trade on the banks of the Ohio as a young man, about the same time as Abe Lincoln had the same experience? Possibly. But it is Hubbard's trace, more than Hubbard himself, that fits into our narrative about the Underground Railroad here in the western Calumet region. Before Chicago was a port, hundreds of pioneers from southern Illinois and Indiana came over Hubbard's Strait to trade at Chicago, exchanging smoked meat and produce for salt. Salt's a major mover in pioneer economics. Hubbard imported the salt from Buffalo, New York via the Great Lakes on ships that he reconfigured that Colonel Perry had sunk in War of 1812. Hubbard's quite a guy. He should be on our quarter as much as anybody. At the same time, the Chicago-Detroit road was being carved through the swampy forest of lower Michigan, striking Lake Michigan to Trail Creek, later the site of Michigan City, Indiana, where Brother DuSable was for a while. 30 years later, the Michigan Central Railroad would neatly parallel the old stage route, offering yet a third way to get to Detroit from Chicago. Oh, the third way? Yes, the other way was the exciting all-water route via Mackinac on Lakes Michigan and Huron. These connections to Detroit made Chicago a destination for escaped slaves seeking freedom in Canada. Not freedom in Chicago. Abolitionists, led by such figures as Charles Volney Dyer, who ran for governor of Illinois on the Liberty ticket 3 times, had discovered that Chicago was rife with Southern sympathizers who would attempt to snatch any black man they could on the streets of the Windy City. There were even black folks turning black folks in at the harbor. Smart black folks in Chicago, they numbered less than 200 in the 1840s at that time, knew enough to carry papers that proclaimed their free black status. In fact, Charles Volney Dyer helped everyone in town get one of these papers. A Dutch-German hybrid that was the lingua franca of tavern owners in northern Illinois at the time, because many people confused Dutch with Deutsch. Deutsch being German for German. As fate would have it, Charles Volney Dyer was one of the owners of the parcel along the ridge that the Hollanders wanted to buy. And soon the settlement, known in later years as Roseland, had become the newest stop on the Underground Railroad. Just east of the Osterhout Hotel was Matthew's old farm, near 134th and St. Lawrence. That's Althill Gardens now. Still a remote area. Let's just say the alderman doesn't even go there. One of the bachelors from the Hammond group settled in there, named Jan Ton, working the 50-acre site and teaching his neighbors the ancient Dutch art of roof thatching. Cane was plentiful in the swamps and was a cheap way to put a roof on your house. On the northern end of the new Dutch settlement could be found Cornelius Kuiper, the unofficial sheriff of the small hamlet. What set Kuiper and Ton apart from their countrymen were they were the only 2 who spoke English out of all of the new immigrants. Bookending the village at 103rd and 134th, these 2 would aid the local Underground Railroad effort for 10 years, helping untold numbers of slaves escape to freedom. Ton had a shack out past the eastern end of the property on the edge of the woods, known locally as Deutsches Bosch, which translates as German woods. It was a favorite haunt of the local Indians who kept returning to these happy hunting grounds for decades. It's likely that this shack was the guest house for Ton's occasional black visitors. Located near the Michigan Central right-of-way, the little house was home to the Decker family later, who arrived from Holland in 1865. It's from Simon Decker's massive manuscript history of Roseland and vicinity, we would get the only description of this structure. It was a mile east of the Ton House, near the woods where the Indians were said to camp. In fact, it was a continued presence of these returning Indians that so unnerved Mrs. Ton, she said she's got to get her hubby to move closer to town. She didn't say it was hubby's Underground Railroad activity. Above-ground railroads like the IC and the Rock Island played an often unheralded role in the transferring of escaped slaves northward. In the Illinois Central's Calumet station, today known as Kensington, where midway between Ton and his partner Kuiper, it would have been a likely stop dropping off spot for slaves en route to Detroit via the line's junction with the Michigan Central, because there was no through business in those days. When the two trains came together at the junction, you have to take everything off the train and go to the other line. Since the spring of 1851, the station at Calumet, originally simply called Junction, did good business as a transfer point for goods. A transfer of special cargo in the opposite direction could have worked as well. The fact that Tun's shack out back, pretty good. The fact that Tun's shack out back was a stone's throw away from the eastbound train to Detroit must not be ignored. The Rock Island, 3 miles east of Kuiper's place, had a flag stop at 95th Street known as the Milk Stop, where local dairy farmers could hail a passing train and get their milk to market in Chicago. Occasionally, escaped slaves were let off at this point. Nearby, the Wilcox house at 99th and Beverly was a good spot to hide overnight. We've got the tradition of them holding folks overnight. Then on to Kuiper's barn at 103rd and Michigan. Did the Dutch kids at the local school next to Kuiper's place occasionally see you black folks getting a drink from his well? After Kuiper had fed and clothed his new arrival, he kept them overnight and then transferred them via wagon to the Ton place down by the river. Ton then put them up as best he could. Then in the middle of the night, with his rifle underneath the wagon seat, he'd set out with his precious cargo for the Holman Tavern over the state line in Indiana. By transporting escaped slaves over the state line, he was committing a felony. Breathing a sigh of relief, Ton would return home, cross the bridge, the fact probably not going unnoticed by Osterhout, and head down east down the lonely river road to his house. Give his horse a quick rub down in the little oats, set the rifle by the door, and try to slip into bed as quietly as he could. His wife, like all wives do, probably asked, "Everything okay?" And hubby would say, heartbeat returning to normal, "Yeah, sure, no problem. Good night, honey." Jan Ton would be sleeping in the next morning, waking hours later than his farmer neighbors. And here's the map we've been looking for. There's Tun's house and there's the shack, so now we know where to dig. We didn't have this even last month, so yeah, so as the Hollanders say, done business.
Done business, yeah. When did you, the cabin story is cool. When did you?
See, when you're not working, you got a lot of time to work on history.
Good deal.
As an unemployed guy with a library full of stuff, I got to looking at this map on the wall and I said, you know what, that's probably here. I reread Decker. There's 4 copies of this. It's never been published. I've been editing it now for 30 years. So it bugged me that we knew that Ton was involved, but we didn't know where exactly his house was. We had a picture of it. We have a family tradition. Paul Ton has been trying to make it today. He might be here for the afternoon session. But my focus is really local, and I love to hear what's going on in Indiana and Southern Illinois. But I'm looking at this tradition, and we finally connected the dots between the milk stop, Wilcox house. The great quote from the Wilcox house is widow Wilcox's granddaughter once heard her grandmother say, they brought another one in last night. And the daughter asked the grandparents, why didn't you ever tell us about this or tell the neighbors? She says, well, we didn't know what the neighbors would think about this. So you never knew who was which or against you. So I always like to say that this Underground Railroad effort was acts of civil disobedience and really a precursor to the civil rights movement, because you had white folks and black folks breaking the law. That's my bit. Glad to bring it here today. It's something else. Yes.
I just wanted